The second wife trap. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stock, gold foil lettering, the kind of card that costs $12 a piece before you even pay postage. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 30th wedding anniversary of Dr. Jonathan Hartwell and Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell. The Rosewood Estate, Newport, Rhode Island. Black tie, 8 o'clock in the evening. Saturday, the 14th of June. Evelyn Hartwell turned the card over in her manicured hands and laughed. One short, dry note that didn't reach her eyes. 30 years. She had hand-addressed every single one of those envelopes herself, because Jonathan always said she had the prettier handwriting. Now she knew why he'd been so eager for her to do it. 3 weeks earlier, Evelyn had come home early from the hospital auxiliary meeting and found her husband in the marble foyer with a girl who couldn't have been older than 25. Blonde, sun-kissed, legs for days. A diamond tennis bracelet Evelyn had never seen before flashing on the girl's wrist. Jonathan's hand had been on the small of the girl's back, guiding her toward the curved staircase that led to the master suite. He'd frozen when he saw Evelyn. The girl, Chloe, she would later learn, had simply smiled slow and cat-like and said, "Oh, you must be the first Mrs. Hartwell." The first. As though there were already a second. That night Jonathan sat Evelyn down in his study, mahogany walls, leather chairs, the faint scent of Macallan and entitlement, and explained it all with the calm precision of a surgeon. "I'm leaving, Evie. I've filed. The papers will be served next week." He pushed a manila folder across the desk like he was handing her a lab result. "I've been more than generous. You keep the Greenwich house, the Mercedes, and a monthly allowance. Chloe and I will take Rosewood and the Boston penthouse. It's only fair. She's young, she wants to entertain." Evelyn opened the folder. Inside was a postnuptial agreement signed by Jonathan 6 months earlier, on a day she remembered because it was the same afternoon he'd surprised her with tickets to Tuscany. He had asked her to sign a blank sheet for the accountant. She had. Trust is a hell of a drug. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet efficiency. Jonathan moved Chloe into the Newport mansion 2 days later. Evelyn watched from the security camera she'd had installed years ago. Jonathan had laughed at her for being paranoid. Now the footage lived on a private cloud only she could access. Chloe sunbathing topless by the pool. Chloe rearranging Evelyn's antiques because the energy was wrong. Chloe on the phone with vendors, booking the anniversary party in Evelyn's name while giggling that the old bat won't even notice. Evelyn noticed everything. She started with the corporate bylaws. Hartwell Medical Solutions, the diagnostics empire Jonathan had built from a single patent in 1998, was structured as a C Corp with 2 classes of stock. Class A voting. Class B non-voting. Jonathan owned 51% of the voting shares. Evelyn owned 49%. He had always told people she had a little preferred stock, nothing that matters. What he had never told anyone, not his lawyers, not his mistress, not even his mother, was that the original Articles of Incorporation contained a single obscure clause buried on page 37. In the event of divorce or legal separation, any transfer of Class A voting shares executed after January 1, 2005, without the written consent of the non-transferring spouse shall be deemed null and void. Jonathan had transferred 12% of his voting shares to a revocable trust in Chloe's name 4 months ago. No consent. No disclosure. Evelyn's signature was nowhere to be found. She printed the clause, highlighted it in neon yellow, and slid it into a new folder labeled simply J. Next came the house. Rosewood had been purchased in 1996 with the proceeds of Evelyn's inheritance from her grandmother. Money Jonathan had insisted be used for our forever home. The deed was in Evelyn's name alone. A year later, when they refinanced to add the guest wing, Jonathan's name had been added for mortgage purposes. He assumed that made it marital property. He was wrong. Rhode Island is not a community property state, and the original purchase predated the marriage by 11 months. Evelyn's real estate attorney confirmed. Rosewood was hers. Sole and separate, she kept going. The Boston penthouse? Bought with proceeds from the sale of Evelyn's premarital condo in Back Bay. Traceable. Hers. The yacht? Titled in the name of a Delaware LLC wholly owned by Evelyn. The vineyard in Napa? Gifted to her outright by Jonathan on their 20th anniversary. On video in front of 200 guests, for tax reasons. Every asset he thought was his had a paper trail leading straight back to her. June 14th arrived flawless, 72 degrees, the Atlantic glittering like scattered sapphires beyond the manicured lawns of rosewood. 600 guests in summer pastels and navy blazers. A string quartet. Oysters the size of silver dollars. Chloe wore white Virginie custom with a neckline that plunged to legal limits, because she told Vogue the week before, "I'm basically the lady of the house now." Jonathan had prepared a speech. Evelyn knew every word of it. Chloe had practiced it in the master bathroom while Evelyn watched on the nanny cam hidden inside the antique clock. At 9:15 p.m., after the lobster bisque and just before the soufflé, Jonathan took the microphone. He was radiant in midnight blue velvet. Chloe stood at his side, one possessive hand on his arm, diamond studs winking in her ears. Evelyn's diamonds reset. 30 years ago, Jonathan began, voice rich with rehearsed emotion. I stood in a church in Greenwich and promised to love one woman forever. Life, as we all know, is more complicated than vows. A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn has been a remarkable partner. But we have grown apart. Tonight, in the spirit of honesty and new beginnings, I want to introduce you to the woman who has brought joy back into my life. My future wife, Chloe Addison. Gasps. A few nervous laughs. Phones rising like periscopes. Chloe gave a little curtsy. Jonathan turned to Evelyn, seated at the head table in quiet dove gray silk, and offered the smile of a man who believed he had already won. Evie, I hope you can find it in your heart to wish us well. Evelyn rose slowly. Every eye in the tent followed her. She wore no jewelry except the simple platinum band she had never removed. She took the microphone from Jonathan's suddenly uncertain hand. Thank you, Jonathan. That was brave. Polite laughter. I too have an announcement. She lifted a small remote. The massive screen behind the string quartet flickered to life. Slide 1. The Articles of Incorporation, Clause 37 highlighted. Some of you are investors in Hartwell Medical Solutions. You may be interested to know that 12% of the voting shares Jonathan attempted to transfer to his fiancée are legally void, which means I currently control 51% of the company he no longer runs. Slide 2. The original deed to Rosewood. This house, where we are standing, was purchased with my inheritance. Jonathan's name was added later for a mortgage that has been paid off for 15 years. In Rhode Island, that makes it sole and separate property. Mine. Slide 3. A video clip. Jonathan on their 20th anniversary, tipsy on champagne, announcing to the crowd, "The vineyard is Evelyn's forever, no strings." The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were stunned silent. Evelyn let the silence stretch just long enough. Jonathan, you are of course free to marry whomever you like. But you will be doing it without Hartwell Medical, without Rosewood, without the penthouse, the yacht, or the vineyard. In fact, she said, turning to Chloe with a smile that could cut glass, the only thing you're taking out of this marriage is the clothes on your back and whatever debt you've managed to accumulate on my credit cards. Chloe's face drained of color so fast her spray tan looked 3 shades darker by contrast. Jonathan tried to grab the microphone. Evelyn stepped aside smoothly. Security is on standby, she said conversationally. And the sheriff's deputy has a copy of the restraining order I filed this morning. Jonathan, Chloe, you have 15 minutes to leave my property. The next 6 minutes were chaos wrapped in couture. Chloe screamed that Evelyn was a jealous old hag. Jonathan threatened to sue everyone in the tent. Someone started slow clapping. Within seconds the entire lawn was applauding Evelyn like she just won an Oscar. A drone overhead, hired by a society blogger, captured Chloe tripping over her hem and face-planting into a tower of champagne coupes. By morning #second wife trap was trending nationwide. 3 months later, Jonathan Hartwell, former CEO, now lived in a 1,200 square foot condo in Quincy he rented from a cousin. The board had removed him within 48 hours of the party. Evelyn stayed on as chairperson. The stock price rose 14% on the news that the adult was back in charge. Chloe lasted 6 weeks. When the Amex Black Card was declined at Bergdorf's, she packed her Louis Vuitton and moved to Aspen with a tech bro who owned fractional jets and 0 prenups. Evelyn sold the Newport house. She never much liked the ocean anyway. and bought a penthouse on Commonwealth Avenue with panoramic views of the public garden. She kept the vineyard. She kept the yacht. She kept the company. And every June 14th, she hosted a small dinner for her closest friends. No plus ones. No speeches. Just laughter, a ridiculous amount of wine, and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had learned 30 years in that the best revenge is simply refusing to lose.